The fuel subsidy debate, they say it's a big debate, and everyone has been asking all the questions, asking how well you can break it down for the Nigerian public to understand it. Joining us to look at the fuel subsidy debate this morning is the immediate past Minister for Interior, Captain Emmanuel Iheanacho. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well,
it's a pleasure being in your program.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And all this talk about fuel subsidy, it was even last week we saw the Senate do their public debate with officers and of the government. They're coming to explain to them, which they still say they still cannot even understand the logic behind fuel subsidy. Perhaps maybe you tell us what you think about the fuel subsidy and possibly break it down for everyone to understand.
Well, thank you very much. I think that there is a need really for one to communicate, to explain exactly what the subsidy is about. We have indeed we have read so much about the fuel subsidy. We continue to listen to debates about the fuel subsidy on the television. But one impression that really one gets is that people don't really understand the subject. So it is very important that we talk about it so that people get to understand it, people understand the logic behind it, and people are better informed in terms of taking a decision or a position as to whether the subsidy should continue or not. Basically, what the subsidy is about is that it costs the marketer roughly about 145 naira to 150 naira a litre to import petroleum products into the Nigerian market. But once you have imported it and landed it and taken it to your facility, the government then says to you, sell it at a discounted rate of 65 naira. So the question arises, the difference between 145 naira that it costs you to bring the product in and the 65 naira that you have to sell it, who accounts for it? And that is where the government subsidy comes in, because the government says, sell it at the discounted rate and I will give you back that difference. So it's very important that we understand the monies that are paid to marketers, the monies that are paid to the NNPC, whether they are beneficiaries of the subsidy or they are actually a medium through which that subsidy is transferred to people who benefit from it. Well, so it's very important that we make that a distinction from the onset. Okay,
before you continue, let me come in here because you are the former Minister for Interior, and of course it then means you have some kind of knowledge of what really go on in government, because once the former Minister for Petroleum, Professor Tam David West, was right here in the studio, which on that day he did say there was nothing like fuel subsidy, that the government, all the talk about subsidy is just to increase the petroleum product and come on the guise of subsidizing that particular product. Mm-hmm. Is there truly a subsidy? If you say they get it, for instance, 145 naira per litre, and the government tells those marketers to now sell for 65 naira, that the difference is paid by the government. Is there any document to that effect that there is any difference being paid by the government?
Of course there is a document. I mean, when I say that it costs 145 to 150 naira a litre to import, it isn't speculation. One of the documents that I could have brought to you would be a template. And I would indeed make a point of sending you a copy of that template at some point in time so that you can publish it fully and people can see exactly how that 150 naira comes about. It comes about the FOB, that's the free on board cost of buying the fuel at the refineries. Then you add the cost of transport to bring it down. Then you add the margin of the person who sells it to you. And then when it gets outside Lagos, it costs you about roughly 6 to 7 naira a litre to bring that product from outside Lagos Bar into your depot. When it gets into the depot, there is a charge for putting it through storage. So when you add all of this together, it comes to 145 to 150 naira a litre. It isn't speculation, because I should have brought a copy of the template with me today, but I can actually send it to you within 24 hours so that you can publish it. And people are then at liberty to see exactly what makes up this huge amount. So there is indeed a subsidy. But the problem is, the subsidy is intended to alleviate the sufferings of the poor man. But I'd like to say to you straight away that the poor man hardly benefits from the subsidy.
Is it when it's taken off then that he will now benefit?
Yes, I will explain to you. Yes, when it's taken off, he will now benefit because the subsidy is misapplied. Because the subsidy goes to people who can really afford to pay the full price of petroleum products that they use. The subsidy is actually enjoyed by the person who goes into the filling station to buy the petrol himself.
But you can explain, sir. I mean, you've said that the people who are supposed to benefit from it
are not benefiting
from it. So you are for the removal of subsidy.
Absolutely.
Would you tell us why?
I will explain. So if you just give me a few minutes and I will explain, and it will become clearer, not only in your mind but those who are watching this program. See, the subsidy is accrues to the person who goes into the filling station to buy the fuel. And the person who goes into the filling station to buy the fuel is the private sector car owner. A middle class person, rich guys who own cars, they go into the filling station and they buy the fuel that they are supposed to pay 150 naira, they buy it at 65 naira. And straight away, for every liter of petrol that they draw for their cars, they have a subsidy that government pays for at 85 naira. Then the next set of people who benefit from it is the guy who operates private transportation services. That's the owners of this transport that poor people use. He goes in there, and what he actually draws when he buys his petrol is a subsidy on the cost of his business. Now, the question that you want to ask, at what point does he pass on the benefits of this subsidy to the common man? How many private sector, rich people, middle class persons who drive private cars, how many times have they stopped on the roadside and they've seen the poor man, the common man trekking, and they're giving him a lift? It never happens.
Is this the result of...
No, please, if I could just make this point. How many times does the private sector businessman who operates private transportation services, how many times does he say, today we are going to give you free ride in our cars? It doesn't happen. And when he draws this subsidized petroleum, does he ever sit down with the poor man to say, let us now negotiate, because I've taken this subsidy, let me see how much I'm going to pass on to you?
We've had this argument before, this argument about who actually goes to buy petrol at the filling stations.
Yeah.
And right now people are beginning to say, especially from the government quarters, you hear that it's actually the people in the middle class,
they are the ones who are benefiting
middle class
from,
and middle class, as it were,
yes.
And that even the transporters who go to buy fuel, things that have to do with mass transport, those vehicles do not exactly use petrol, they use diesel, which has been deregulated.
Yes.
You know, we've heard those arguments, but I would like to ask, is this the result of some concrete research?
Of course. I mean, what I'm saying to...
this is just speculation. The fact that, okay, or randomly I go to buy petrol and the people I see there are people who look like they're in the upper middle class or they're in the middle class, and as such, I guess they will fall around government offices and so, and as such, I do not think that this fuel subsidy is trickling down, or this is actually the result of some vigorous research.
Well, what research do you need? I'm making a statement of fact. How many times do you see a poor man with a car? Do poor men own cars? Do poor Nigerian workers have cars?
I think the question will be,
please listen.
What is the definition of poor? I mean, we have to clarify these things. What do we mean by someone who is poor? If my car is a rickety, maybe 1985 car I have been using for a while, still managing to put together, and I managed to go to a filling station to buy petrol, would you classify me as middle class?
Well, let's look at it. If you look at the population of Nigerians, when we're talking about the common man, we're talking about people who cannot afford to have cars. If you can afford to have a car, however rickety it is, you may have made a transition from being a common man to being an uncommon person. So we're talking about the vast majority of Nigerians who cannot afford to have cars, who need to have access to efficient transportation services. And we maintain this huge subsidy, and what we really want to know is, does it really trickle down to them? And really, the statements I'm making are testable, because you say, is this the result of vigorous research? What research? Go and stand in the filling station and see the people who are buying the fuel and tell me how many common men are actually benefiting from it. But let us not miss the point, because this is one of the points that I would like to make. I will take your question and then perhaps we'll go to the next one. It is very important to talk about the issue. Everybody says, when we remove this fuel subsidy, prices will rise. Prices will rise, but there are other things that are actually going to happen that people are not capturing. And it's very important that we discuss those issues so that people become better informed about this subject.
Captain Iheanacho, you actually took the words out of my mouth. The price is rising. You know the market mechanisms in Nigeria, that when one thing happens here, the ripple effect. These same people that you say are the poor masses that cannot afford to own cars. Yes, they use the public transportation system, but by the time you remove the fuel subsidy, the transportation prices will go up, and that will trickle down to other areas. So how are the people now going to benefit from the removal of the fuel subsidy?
That's right. The problem is that every time we've had this discussion, people focus on only one thing that would happen, because there are several things happening at the same time. If we remove the fuel subsidy, because we want to redirect that subsidy to the people for whom it is meant, first of all, prices will rise. But at the same time that prices are rising, you know that we are recovering. People who have access to that subsidy would now give it up because they would not be able to buy subsidized fuel anymore. The estimates that we have currently is that we spend about 1.5 trillion naira per annum on this subsidy. So at the same time as prices are rising within the economy, we are also recovering 1.5 trillion, which you can set against the price rises in the economy. Now, if you want to find out what the net benefit is to those to the so-called common man, the net price rise over a period of time and the net recovery from those who are holding the subsidy, how does it equate? And I tell you that the recovery of 1.5 trillion from people who should not be benefiting will be much more than the increase in prices that you will see.